They date the fossils based on the strata of Earth where they find them. If they're deeper, they're older. Do you know how they date the strata of Earth, the layers of Earth? Based on the fossils. Are you listening carefully? You ask them, so how do we date these strata? Well, it's based on the fossils that we found there. So how do we date the fossils? Based on the strata where we find them. It's circular reasoning. Talk about a desperate effort to try to prove something that isn't true. Now, here is where a lot of people get confused. Do I believe in evolution? Yes. I believe in microevolution. Let me explain. In the articles that you'll find in National Geographic, especially in that one where they talked about was Darwin right, they talk about where Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands and he found all these different varieties of finches, and that must be proof of evolution. Well, that's called microevolution. Microevolution is very different from macroevolution. Let me see if I can read a definition for you here. Microevolution refers to varieties within a given type. Change happens within a group, but the descendant is clearly the same type as the ancestors. This might be better called variation or adaptation, but the changes are horizontal in effect, not vertical. Now, how many of you would agree that the skeletons that you will find of dogs could be vastly different based on whether or not it is a Great Dane or a Chihuahua? In that article about dogs, it traces all of the dogs back to 2 original dogs that were wolves, or wolf-like. Well, that's what the Bible says. Noah didn't need to have 2 dachshunds and 2 chihuahuas and 2 poodles and 2 of all those dogs on the ark. The DNA of all the dogs in the world can be traced back to common ancestors that were probably very much wolf-like. That's why the wild dogs, the dingoes that you find in Australia, and then you've got the coyotes in North America, and almost in Africa you've got the African dogs. Every continent has its wild dog, but they share the same DNA. Now, why do I take so much time to talk about this? You would see vast differences in the skeletons among those dogs. What about, now go to the slide about people. Do we see differences in people on the earth? Does that mean that we've evolved from different creatures? Or in the DNA of Adam and Eve was all the variety that you see sitting around you right now? I'm going to say something that is very volatile, but it's truth. You want to hear it? When was the theory of evolution developed and taking off? What time in history, roughly? 1844. He took his voyage on the Beagle and began to write his thesis. Was slavery an issue in the world back then? Are you aware that one of the arguments in favor of slavery were people saying that some people are not as human as others, that they haven't evolved as far as others? And it is beyond me how any African American could embrace evolution, because really it was forged in the bowels of trying to prove that some humans were more highly developed than others. That was the context of what was happening. Why did Adolf Hitler want to kill all the Jews and certain people? Didn't he believe in the Aryan race was more highly developed and superior to others? You see what I'm saying? Embracing evolution is really embracing the idea of survival of the fittest. It's embracing racism, it's embracing euthanasia, and it's okay to kill those who are inferior, because what happens in the animal world? It's survival of the most superior species. You take it to its ultimate extreme, and that's where you're going to land. Missing links. I've got news for you. They're still missing. Oh, but Pastor Doug, how many times have we seen on TV or read articles about how they've found these missing links? Let me give you a classic example of what they find. Here's a Time magazine a few years ago where how man began. Now, what you've got there on the cover is a picture that is Exhibit A of what happens. They will find particles of a skull somewhere in Africa, no other bones. They won't find complete skeletons. They'll find particles of a skull, and a very ambitious evolutionist, who, by the way, is being funded in order to find things. If he stops finding things, he loses his funding or her funding. You listening? They are extremely motivated to talk to their benefactors and say, you'll never guess what we found. We found a missing link. They will find a little piece of bone here, a tooth here, and they will then take a lot of plaster of Paris, which you can see in the gray, and they say, see, when we fill in the gaps, this is what it looked like. Now, first of all, let's just suppose that they are accurate, but it looks like they took a lot of liberties there trying to make it look ape-like. Let's just suppose. I just showed you all the diversity of skeletons you can find among dogs, and you know what? They're all dogs. Right? How much diversity do we find among skeletons of human? I won't ask you to look at the skull of the person next to you, but I'd venture to say that we got a lot of different looking skulls, and as you go around the world, they made a big deal about saying down in the Philippines they found this new race of prehistoric missing links because they're only about 3 feet tall, and that's their argument. Do we have races of people in the world today that are 4 feet tall? Called pygmies. That doesn't mean that they're the missing links. You've got genetic diversity of humans all over the world. They have never yet found a complete skeleton of anybody that is half ape and half human. What you will find as you go to the museums is a lot of very creative artwork. Sculptors will sculpt what they think Mr. Missing Link looked like, and Mrs. Link and all the little missing links, and they'll paint their pictures and they'll say, here's how they spent their day, and this is what, then they'll recreate it. But they don't have them. Not only do they not have the missing link for us to monkey, but they don't have the missing link between the alligator and the rats, and between the bats and the birds, and they're missing them. The transitionary species between the different kinds are all absent. I'm just pausing here because I want that to sink in. And yet people believe that, you know, the excuse, the argument that is offered by evolutionists for that is, they said there were leaps. All of a sudden, things change very quickly. And there's a spontaneous great generation of change. And that's why we don't find, because when it transitioned from alligator to moose, it did it very quickly. And so there are very few skeletons around. And the reason that they apply the millions and billions of years for these things happening is because they know that you can't observe any case of it in modern history. And so they say, well, because it happens so slowly, we can't observe it. It's like staring at a big clock. You may not see the hands move if it's moving so slowly. You see what I'm saying? But, Doug, you have to admit, there are similarities among the species. And you've probably heard, do you know that we share 98% or 97% of the same DNA as chimpanzees? We share some DNA with all mammals. It doesn't mean that you're a marsupial or a skunk. There are very high percentages of certain things we hold in common. Because there are similarities among species does not prove evolution. Let me illustrate that. I've got a picture here on the screen. I've got a new pickup truck and a car and a motorcycle. Are there similarities between the car and the pickup and the motorcycle? Let's talk about it for a second. Do they all have some lighting system? Do they have inflated tires? Do they have electrical systems? Do they have motors that use oil and gas and exhaust systems? They've got propulsion systems. They've got tail lights, speedometers. There's a lot of things. They got braking systems. Thank you. A lot of similarities. Okay. One is a Kawasaki made in Japan. One is a Ford made in Michigan, I suppose, and one is a GMC or Dodge, I forget. All made at different factories. Because they have things in common does not mean one came from the other. The motorcycle did not evolve into the car, which then evolved into the truck. Why do they have so many things in common? Because they operate in the same environment. Why do many creatures in this world have so many things in common? Because we live in the same environment where there is water and certain gases. We need to propel ourselves. We need eyes to see in order to know where to propel ourselves. Because we live in the same environment, there's certain similarities. That doesn't mean one came from another. That means that the designer realized there needs to be certain things in common. That's what they say at the factory where they make the motorcycles, the cars, and the trucks. We need to design them with these certain things because they have to operate within these parameters. That's why there's similarity in species. It is really ridiculous reasoning to say because there are similarities between your hand and the hand of a raccoon means that you used to live in a tree. But that's the logic that's being used. We're privileged in this church to have a number of doctors, physicians, even some scientists, teachers, and I'm calling on Dr. Steve and Michelle Friend because there are two doctors. Come on up here for a second. Medical doctor?
Yes.
MD?
Yes.
Veterinarian?
Yes.
You both went to school?
Yes.
Did you take some education from even some secular schools? They taught evolution in those places? Do you believe in evolution?
No.
Do we have a microphone? No. Here we go. Thank you, Vicki. Did you take some zoology classes, Michelle?
Yes.
You did. And do you believe in creation or evolution?
Creation.
Is it because your church mandates it or it seems logical based on your studies?
No, it seems logical.
Based on your studies. All right, Dr. Steve? All right. You've also probably been exposed to both teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And do you believe in evolution or creation?
Before your presentation, evolution.
Oh, we're glad we're making progress. Oh, thanks.
Definitely creation.
Is it because it's a church teaching that's mandated and you feel obligated and the Bible teaches it? Or is it your reasoning?
It's my reasoning, and after taking gross anatomy and dissecting the human body, there's just no other way to tell. You know, it's definitely creationism.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Can you say thank you, Dr. Steve, Michelle? I did that deliberately because there's an assumption that, well, it's only uneducated religious zealots, people who are really involved in the medical field or the biological or zoology or studying animals, they know. That's a lie. It's a myth. There are tens and thousands of scientists. Some of them are not even Christians, but they still believe in creation. I was talking to somebody this weekend. Does not go to church, does not practice any religion, but if you were to ask him, do you believe in creation or evolution? He'll say, it's got to be creation. Only an idiot would believe in evolution because and I don't mean to be, forgive me, I'm not trying to be derogatory, but this is what he said. There is no logical reason that you can embrace the organization and the interworking systems that we see in the universe and in the human body. If we look at a car and know that this means that somewhere there's a car maker, how much more complex is a human body than a car? How many of you would agree that it is absurd to look at an automobile and say, it oozed up out of the oil over millions of years? Because it's got the ignition system and the propulsion system and the braking system and the electronics and the cooling system, all these systems that operate with design, you know, there's intelligence there. What is more complex, a car or a human? Matter of fact, when you read the Genesis account, it seems clear that God made the creatures in order of their complexity. He starts out beginning with the land, the environment in which the creatures are going to operate. He makes the air and he makes the land. And then he ends up making, separates them, and the water from the land. Then he makes the vegetation. And some people say that, it was over millions of years that God, these days are really millions of years. Well, he makes the vegetation on the third day. He doesn't make the sun until the fourth day. How's the vegetation going to live for millions of years without a sun? Well, Doug, if there's no sun, then where was the light when God said, let there be light? God is light. When he came to this chaotic orb, he said, let there be light. He was the source of light. He began to spin the planet. That separated day from night. That's not a problem. I believe when it says he made the sun the fourth day, he did it the fourth day. You know why? He doesn't want his worship in the sun. The vegetation can live by the light of God. Anyway, so things got more complex, and then he makes the creatures of the air and the creatures of the water, and then he makes the land creatures, and then he makes man, and finally he makes the most complex creature, which is a woman. Right? That's the danger of using both sides of your brain. Just complex. Now, I started talking about the dating dilemma. Let me read something.